Hello, Melissa. This is Brad Shaw from the Crazy Good Turns podcast.
Yes, sir.
Is now an okay time to talk to you?
Yes.
Are you sure? I want to make sure you're okay because I heard you were on the way to the emergency room.
Actually, I was on my way to the emergency room right now. I just got in a car from the emergency room. I'm okay.
Okay.
I can talk.
That's Melissa Sherwood from Liberty, Texas. Like tens of thousands of Texas residents, her home was completely flooded when Hurricane Harvey stalled for days over the state in late August, dumping more than 33 trillion gallons of rain. Melissa stayed in her house because she had nowhere else to go. And after a full month, the mold was making her sick. That's why she went to the emergency room. 2017 is the most devastating and costly hurricane season in modern history. Hurricanes Harvey and Irma inflicted between $150 and $200 million in damage to Texas and Florida alone. That's to say nothing of the human cost. Thousands of lives disrupted, people displaced, homes destroyed, and the situation is even worse in the U.S. territories in the Caribbean. And Hurricane Maria has essentially destroyed all of Puerto Rico's infrastructure. Recovery from all three hurricanes is going to take years. Today we're going to hear about an organization that's helping families affected by these hurricanes put their lives back together, St. Vincent de Paul's Disaster Services Division. The Society of St. Vincent de Paul, a Catholic charity focused on the needy and suffering, has been around for more than 150 years. Its Disaster Services Division, though, is only a few years old, but was born from the Hurricane Katrina evacuee crisis in 2005. And the story of its creation, its work, and its leader is as inspiring as any we've told, particularly now. This is Crazy Good Turns. We tell inspiring stories about people who do amazing things for others, and I'm your host, Brad Shaw. Elizabeth Disco Shear, who goes by Liz, was born in Logan, West Virginia, and raised in a Catholic Italian-Hungarian family.
I had two great aunts that were Catholic nuns in southwestern West Virginia. And as a young child, when we would go there on summer vacations to visit them in the area they were working in, they would always take me and my sisters out to work with families that were in the rural communities. And we hated it at the time. We thought it was a terrible way to spend summer vacation. They used to ask us to give up our toys, like, donate one of our Christmas toys that we'd gotten the Christmas before, or to go into, they would call them the hollers in West Virginia, and to go into these communities where the houses had dirt floors and there were raggedy children. And when you're a young child, you have no perspective on what other people's lives are like. Looking back on that, I'm very grateful because it kind of instilled in me a heart for service.
Liz graduated from the University of Texas at Austin and had several careers over the years. Dean of a college, investigator for the federal government, consultant. That heart of service also kept her volunteering with Big Brothers and Big Sisters and organizing voter registration drives, always drawn to social justice causes. Then, in 1998, a pact she made with God sent her life in a different direction.
I had a sister that became ill in Dallas, and she had cancer. And I was at one of the area hospitals where she was undergoing her surgery. And I went into the chapel and I made a promise to God. And at the time, I was running a pretty large consulting firm and making really good money. And I told God if he would cure my sister, that I would give up my consulting practice and I would go to work for charity. Well, my sister was cured. And so I went to work for Catholic Charities of Dallas, and then I went on to work for St. Vincent de Paul. And it was one of those life-changing moments, one of those aha moments.
Liz started working at St. Vincent de Paul of Dallas in January of 2005. At the time, she ran a program that helped immigrant and refugee women train for and find jobs in Dallas and Fort Worth. She also worked with refugees from the Lost Boys of Sudan to set up 100 apartments for them in the Dallas area. It was an experience Liz would soon find critical when, just 8 months later, Hurricane Katrina slammed into the Gulf Coast.
So it was, again, one of those life-changing moments when you had, we had over 26,000 evacuees coming in from both Hurricane Rita and Hurricane Katrina from the New Orleans area.
The city of Dallas and St. Vincent de Paul had never experienced a humanitarian disaster on the scale of Katrina. Thousands of evacuees poured into Reunion Arena, former home of the Dallas Mavericks. Liz and her team set up on site to help any way they could, ministering to families and delivering baby diapers and formula. One day driving home from the arena, Liz got some unexpected news.
So I'd finished like at 8 hours there with our local St. Vincent de Paul groups, and I was driving home, and I heard on the radio the mayor was talking about they were going to need to close Reunion Arena, this mega shelter, because they were losing millions of dollars of revenue a day for the city, which is understandable, but you have to do something with all the families that are there. And she said, we've come up with the plan, and we're going to ask one charity to do the clothes for the families that are transitioning out, and we're going to ask St. Vincent de Paul to do the furniture for the families that are transitioning out. And I was like, I almost ran off the freeway in Dallas. I was like, oh my goodness, how are we going to help all these people? It was overwhelming for me.
So no one at St. Vincent de Paul had talked to the mayor?
Not to my knowledge. I think the mayor was just trying to look for solutions, and we're a voluntary organization active in disaster, along with other groups in the community like the American Red Cross and Salvation Army and the United Methodists and the Baptist Men. We were all working together on this major disaster, and we had never ever experienced anything like that. And of course, for me, in my career, I had never experienced a disaster of that magnitude.
Having had such a huge and highly public burden suddenly placed on her shoulders, Liz called an emergency board meeting late that night, developed a plan, and raised nearly $3 million in 6 weeks to buy the furniture the mayor had committed them to distribute.
I called several colleagues of mine that were in the military, and they said, you need to do an industrial scale response to this disaster. You can't just give out used furniture. You need to purchase furniture in bulk.
They got a warehouse donated in Plano, Texas, and created what would become the organization's signature program called House in a Box.
And so we call it House in a Box because many of the items come boxed. They're like IKEA-type furniture that families can put together, like the dinette comes boxed, the dresser comes boxed. The mattress, of course, would be in plastic, and it wouldn't be in a box, but it would be, they would be able to transport it. And then they get a couch, and they get towels, and they get dishes and pots and pans, kind of like a starter apartment setup. And we call it a House in a Box because in Texas, we determined that everybody has a pickup truck or a trailer or a neighbor that has one, and so they could probably transport those items to their temporary home. And we knew during Katrina we had thousands of community volunteers helping these newly formed Texans reestablish their lives.
Over the next year, Liz, her team, and volunteers helped 15,000 Katrina evacuees transition into new housing, many with the House in a Box. And that success showed both Liz and St. Vincent de Paul that they could play a bigger role in disaster response across the U.S. So Liz and her team took over handling all U.S. disasters from St. Vincent de Paul's South Central region in Texas, where Liz was based. By 2014, realizing their work needed a more formal structure to better deploy the resources, St. Vincent de Paul created its Disaster Services Division with Liz as its leader. All told, Liz and team have transitioned more than 70,000 people into homes after disasters at a cost of nearly $40 million. Flooding in the Midwest, tornadoes throughout the South and Midwest, Hurricanes Rita, Gustav, Alex, the West Texas fertilizer plant explosion. St. Vincent de Paul Disaster Services has been there for every one of them and more. And what they do is different from many other relief organizations. It's an end-to-end approach to relief and recovery that can take years.
We're there when the disaster starts, and we're there when the disaster ends. We do long-term disaster recovery work. The Red Cross is a great partner of ours, and Salvation Army is also, but they do what's called mass care, where they're there at the very beginning with the feeding, with the sheltering. So they're more on the immediate relief. We're more on the long-term recovery process, where we do the disaster case management. We help families navigate FEMA and insurance, the lack of insurance. We try to find solutions in the faith-based community and with other community organizations to help rebuild homes, to help find jobs for families. And we even do long-term economic recovery summits to help the whole community rebuild.
Obviously, Liz and her team are facing an unprecedented challenge with the aftermath of Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria. Over 800,000 people have registered for FEMA assistance in Texas and more than 1.4 million in Florida. Stats for the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico aren't in yet, but FEMA tells Liz the registrations will surpass Katrina. Liz, who's based in Irving, Texas and the D.C. area, has spent most of her time in recent weeks on the ground in the hardest-hit parts of Texas and Florida. She was on the phone with her director in Puerto Rico just before our interview and was planning a trip there as soon as it was possible to even get to the island safely. She typically arrives at a disaster area within 72 hours of the event, or as soon as it's safe to be on site. How important is it that you talk to the people, the citizens affected, and what are you listening for when you're there, right after a disaster?
Well, I've always thought as a leader, I don't need to be always at 30,000 feet behind a desk in D.C. I need to be on the ground. I need to be touching the people. I need to be hearing their stories. And I'm listening to determine what are they seeing? What's going on? What have they experienced? And you hear people talk about, well, I didn't have flood insurance, or I was renting this place, or I was doing a lease purchase. Or I just came out of, my home has 2 feet of standing water, but part of the house doesn't have it, so I'm going to stay in it. And you try to explain to them about mold. But the other thing is sometimes it's important just to sit there and listen and let a survivor tell you their story over and over again, because that's part of their healing process. And I want to be there because I want to go through and I want to witness by my presence, both for our people and those we are serving, because I think it's critical in leadership to really understand the extent of the problem.
Liz arranged for us to speak by phone with a woman named Olive Broussard from Raywood, Texas, about an hour's drive northeast of Houston and an area hard hit by the flooding. Olive lives alone. Her home suffered extensive roof and wall leaks. Like Melissa, she knows the house has mold but is living in it because she has no place else to go. St. Vincent de Paul Disaster Services was among the first relief groups in Raywood, setting up camp at the Sacred Heart Church. And the church was the first place Olive went when the flood subsided.
Oh, wow. Just knowing that they were there, that there was someone who was there to help us through this process. I mean, because there was, because we couldn't get out, the stores weren't open, they were running short on lots of things, so you could come here for water, which is a big issue because when, you don't know what's in the water, when the water's been so high like that, you don't know if your sewage is going to work or if something's going to back up. So water was a big issue, and there was lots of, water here, people going and getting supplies and coming back and, handing it out to you. It was just such a comfort to know that they were here for us. And there was such a gentleness and a kindness. It was like if you see the face of God, I really felt like I saw it through all this, through the people that, were working here fearlessly to try and help us all, everyone. They didn't ask you any particulars. They were just...
And as for Melissa, despite feeling sick from the mold and having to manage through so many other issues getting her life back in order, she came to that same church for a different reason, to help others.
I've always loved doing that. And the reason why is because growing up, my father always told me that there are people out there that are worse than you. And to just put a smile on someone's face or to make them know that I understand where they're coming from, that they're not alone. It just fills my heart up with joy. I mean, I know it might sound corny, but it's true. It really does. It just does something for me. It feels like that's my calling.
What encourages me is I see people working together under the most dire of situations. And also in Hurricane Harvey, we had a mother that had just had a baby on September 6th, like days after Harvey hit the Texas coast. And she came in with that newborn baby. The baby's name is Marcus. And Marcus brought hope to us. So when we can see new life and the twinkle in a child's eye, that renews everything that we have and gives us purpose for our work.
I'm Brad Shaw, and thanks for listening to this episode of Crazy Good Turns. Go to crazygoodturns.org to learn more about or donate to St. Vincent de Paul Disaster Services Division. You can also submit your ideas for extraordinary people or organizations we should feature. And stay connected with us between episodes by following us on Facebook and Twitter. This season, we're excited to announce that we're giving a $50,000 grant to the nonprofit that does the most to creatively spread their Crazy Good Turns story, a virtuous and self-reinforcing circle of gratitude. We'll announce the grant recipient at the end of this season. Crazy Good Turns is audio engineered by Stephen Key. Music supervision and mixing by Score in Los Angeles. Research and editing by Martine Chaussard. And special thanks to Megan Basinger.
If you don't know about them, definitely go learn about them because they are strong, powerful. They can change your life. They can change your life in a couple days.